Good afternoon. My name is Alan Barrett and it's a pleasure to welcome everyone to this National Economic Dialogue for 2021. It's an honour for me to be chair again this year. This is the sixth NED since 2015. And this year's dialogue is, of course, very different in format from the previous events. And of course, apart from the different format, this NED is also different in that we're holding our discussions following a remarkable time in human history. While the worst of the pandemic might be over, we know that many people in many sectors still face challenges arising from ongoing closures and restrictions. We also know that the damage caused by that pandemic and the associated economic upheaval has been immense, and that time and resources will be needed to repair that damage. In spite of the changed format and the challenging context, I hope we'll be able to accomplish our goals over the next 2 days, and let me explain how I see these goals. So gathered around the country right now and watching today are a wide range of representative bodies and other interested parties with views on how Budget 2022 should be designed and structured. Many of you will make these views known through submissions and through other routes. And while a few of you will propose tax increases, maybe a very small few, or other funding mechanisms, it's likely that the sum of your total demands would exceed the available resources. So the next 2 days are to some degree about sharing views and priorities and providing food for thought to Ministers Donoghue and McGrath and to their colleagues in government. Our discussions are an input into their work as they perform that central role of government, balancing competing claims on public resources. So as a former member of the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council, I'm also keenly aware of another difference with previous NEDs. The fiscal rules have essentially been suspended for the immediate term. In previous years, our discussions were generally set in the context of the available fiscal space, that awful term. This year, our discussions will probably include some thoughts on the medium-term path for the public finances. And while that might broaden the scope of our discussion, I hope we can anchor ourselves to some degree around the notion that current spending in particular will ultimately need to be matched by current resources. It goes without saying that we will all have different takes on what's needed to restore our economy and society. However, in previous national economic dialogues, some areas of consensus have emerged, and that consensus has assisted decision-making. I will quickly mention one other new dimension to this year's dialogue, and that is the inclusion of a breakout session on health. In my career as an economist, I've often tried to exclude myself from the debate on health, only to be drawn in again. The scale of health in the overall budget and the ongoing cost pressures mean that any budgetary discussion must ultimately include health. But more broadly, I think we increasingly understand that a good health system is both an economic and a social necessity, and so it's good to be including it as one of the topics in our deliberations this year. Let me now say just a few words about how we're proceeding for the rest of the afternoon. So in a few moments, I'll be welcoming the Taoiseach to formally open the dialogue. After the Taoiseach speech, we'll have two scene-setting interventions which will be delivered by the Minister for Finance and then by the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform. And after that, I'll provide some directions on how you can go about accessing the breakout sessions for which you've registered. So once we've done that, we'll take a short break before the ministers and the rapporteurs begin their breakouts. So with those few opening remarks, it's a real honour and a pleasure for me to welcome the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, who will provide his opening remarks. So, Taoiseach.
Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to join you for this year's National Economic Dialogue. I would like to thank Minister Donoghue, Minister McGrath and their officials for organising the dialogue again this year, and also Professor Alan Barrett for once again chairing proceedings today, as he has done so ably over the past few years. The National Economic Dialogue is an opportunity for us to come together to discuss the economic challenges we face, the choices that present themselves, and how we can move forward. I'm very pleased that so many of you are taking part, representing so many different strands of our society, enriching our discussions with your diverse views and experiences. This is particularly important this year as we emerge from the pandemic and the unprecedented impact it has had on our lives and livelihoods over the past year and a half. As we gradually reopen and look towards recovery, I believe it important that we take the time to recognise that the pandemic has been a watershed experience for Ireland's economy and society. We have a unique opening now to learn from this experience, to reflect and to take the steps to build back better. The government is committed to recovering and renewing our economy and society in a balanced, sustainable and inclusive manner to the benefit of all our people and regions. This includes addressing the fallout of the pandemic, particularly its effect on so many workers, along with tackling persistent regional disparities and addressing the impacts of Brexit and the green and digital transition. This also means leveraging the substantial opportunities that technology and digitalisation can bring in our recovery and our decarbonisation journey. A more inclusive recovery also means ensuring people can access employment opportunities. We are putting a considerable focus on participation and on reducing barriers as we rebuild and grow our labour market. In the coming years, this will include introducing statutory sick pay, implementing our roadmap for social inclusion, and undertaking initiatives to address gender equality, including responding to the recent Citizens' Assembly on this matter. We will also place the challenge of housing at the centre of our recovery. An ambitious housing plan to substantially increase housing supply over the coming years is the immediate priority for the government. This will necessitate genuine cross-government effort. We need to ensure we have the land, people, skills, capacity, and both public and private sector finance required. We need to improve how we plan and deliver housing with necessary capacity and drive in the public service, as well as fewer delays through legal challenges to badly needed housing. Increased supply of affordable housing will in turn ease some of the broader economic and social challenges people face in their lives. Houses can't be built overnight, but but details of the government's approach and pathway to increase supply over the next few years will be set out shortly in our new Housing for All strategy. The ambitions of this government are considerable, whether that be tackling our carbon emissions and placing us firmly on the path to a 50% reduction by 2030, bringing about generational change in our health, education and higher education system, or delivering on our goal of ensuring everybody has access to quality housing. I believe these ambitions are shared ones, held by government, by the Irish people, and by you all here today. We all want to make our country a better place, and that is why we are here, to share our views on how this can be achieved. At the same time, we must be realistic about the path that lies ahead. In the past 18 months, we've provided extraordinary levels of support. Around €38 billion has been spent by government. This was necessary and appropriate given the scale of the challenge we faced. However, this is not sustainable, and we must now move to the next phase, in which the finite resources that government can deploy are targeted at those who need them most and used in a way that best supports recovery and our future prosperity. In the coming months and years, we face challenging headwinds, whether that be the fallout of the pandemic and its impact on so many businesses and workers, the continued economic disruption brought about by Brexit, or the ongoing discussions taking place at the OECD on the future of international taxation. While we will be ambitious in our plans and in what we want to achieve, we must be mature enough as a society to recognise that there are trade-offs, that not everything can be achieved overnight, and that for so many of the challenges we face, there are no easy, quick answers or solutions. Central to our approach and our debate here today must be the balancing of our ambitions with what is possible. The Summer Economic Statement will set out the medium-term fiscal framework in which we have to operate, setting out a pathway towards a broadly balanced budget as employment recovers. This will mean making choices around how and what we deliver, choosing what we focus upon, ensuring we are taking a sustainable and responsible approach to our public finances so that we will again have the space to respond should challenges strike again, as they surely will, and managing within the real constraints we face. The coming decade, I believe, will be one of extraordinary change, bringing with it new challenges, new opportunities, and many choices for how we as a society should proceed. I believe that it is critically important that we bring people with us on the journey that lies ahead, and this can be helped by social dialogue and regular and open engagement with all parts of society. I've always strongly believed in the need to build coalitions of support for the transformations and choices that are required. This is no different now. We need a conversation on our shared common purpose as a society, how we can tackle the challenges that lay ahead of us in an inclusive and fair way that does not divide us or have parts of our community or particular sectors feeling embattled or isolated. I believe today's national economic dialogue is a key part of the engagement we need. Indeed, the timing of this year's event is very fortuitous, as it provides a valuable forum to discuss the future of our economy as we start looking beyond COVID-19. With that in mind, I want to share with you this afternoon how the government is supporting the recovery and how we are preparing for the new challenges and opportunities on the horizon. The economic impact of the pandemic has been profound, having brought about the most rapid and dramatic recession recorded outside of the world wars. Given the magnitude of the pandemic's impact on our lives and livelihoods, the government's response has also been unprecedented. Nowhere is that more clear than in the steps government has taken to protect workers and businesses. And this has included the deployment of €14.5 billion to date through the three main support schemes: the Pandemic Unemployment Payment, the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme, and the COVID Restrictions Support Scheme. Working collectively, we have taken huge steps forward in both controlling the virus and rolling out an unprecedented vaccine programme as fast as supplies allow. These efforts have allowed us to put in place the safe, phased reopening of social and economic activities, and why we are able to introduce a comprehensive plan for recovery and renewal. At the start of this month, the government launched the Economic Recovery Plan. This plan will drive our recovery as we emerge from the pandemic. It is aligned with our strategic policy objectives in areas including innovation, skills, resilience and productivity, as well as the changes flowing from the government's climate action commitments. The plan sets out renewed supports, investments and policies for a new stage of economic recovery, building on the unprecedented support provided to date. The plan expands key pandemic supports, including the Employment Wage Subsidy Scheme and Pandemic Unemployment Payment, providing clarity and certainty for businesses and employees over the period ahead. In addition, the new Pathways to Work strategy will help minimise the long-term scarring effects of the pandemic on the labour force, supporting those whose jobs are permanently lost while helping people to secure new jobs through intense activation and upskilling and reskilling initiatives. Many of the jobs that will be created in the coming years will be in new areas of opportunity, rooted in a greener and more digital economy. And this means that our focus will be on recovering differently, with more productive, innovative, resilient and, importantly, more secure and valued jobs. Investing in our people and their talents and skills is the linchpin in achieving this. We are reinvigorating Ireland's National Skills Framework, rolling out 50,000 additional education and training places, introducing a new work placement experience programme, and introducing new initiatives to increase the take-up of apprenticeships. Our approach also recognises that the pandemic has brought new urgency to the challenges that lie ahead: climate action, housing, digitalisation, an ageing population, and the pursuit of balanced regional development, to name but a few. Therefore, our core objective is to not just rebuild, but to build back better, to support not only job creation, but to position our society and economy to meet the challenges ahead. The government is making a significant investment to prepare and respond to these challenges, to bring about an investment-led recovery, preparing our society for the future. We will deliver major strategic investment in our national infrastructure under the revised National Development Plan, supplemented by funding from the European Recovery and Resilience Facility and the Brexit Adjustment Reserve. This will build on existing investment, with 10.8 billion in public capital investment committed this year alone, a record sum. Public investment under the revised National Development Plan will generate local employment and will improve the capability and capacity for economic activity to take place throughout all the regions of the country. A new climate action plan will be published in conjunction with the revised National Development Plan, and in building on the progress to date, will include additional policies and measures in every sector to bring about the significant changes needed to transform our economy and society. And as part of the Shared Island Initiative, the government will invest to enhance the all-island economy, working with the Executive in Northern Ireland and with the British government. Securing our long-term prosperity must also mean ensuring our public finances remain on a solid and sustainable footing. Over the next 2 decades, our population will change from one of the youngest in Europe to among the oldest, which will see demand for health and social welfare grow, with significant costs for the state. We have a responsibility to future generations to start preparing for those changes now. To ensure the state's ability to continue to fund public services as the population ages, the recently established Commission on Taxation and Welfare will provide a medium to long-term blueprint to government to inform the direction of our taxation and welfare policy. Complementing this, the ongoing work by the Commission on Pensions and the development of an automatic enrolment retirement savings system will lay the foundations for a sustainable, balanced pensions system. And as the recovery takes hold, we will reduce the fiscal deficit, as well as setting out in our medium-term roadmap how we will return to a broadly balanced budget. This will ensure that we will have the resources and ability to tackle the challenges, known and unknown, that lie ahead. We're not going back to the pre-COVID world. The pandemic has represented a dramatic and unprecedented social and economic shock for Ireland and the wider world. To rebuild and renew after this shock, not just to recover from the disruption wrought by the virus, but to move forward, we need to work urgently and with a clear vision. This afternoon, I've described how the government is charting the path to a positive, sustainable future by providing unprecedented support to our workers and businesses during the pandemic, but also by laying out a longer-term pathway to tackle the challenges we face and ensure our people can benefit from the new opportunities ahead. We can and we will rebuild our economy. We will get our people back to work and safely emerge from the pandemic, and we will align our economy for the digitalised and green future, creating more productive, sustainable and, importantly, more secure and valued jobs. In doing so, we are creating a pathway to a new and better future for our country. I look forward to your input and views today and tomorrow, which will help guide our path to a sustainable economy to the benefit of all our people. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Taoiseach. It's a wonderful speech. You covered a huge amount of ground, and I think you've actually sort of set up the next 2 days extremely well for us. I mean, I had touched on some of the themes, but I think the Taoiseach has given a much more comprehensive overview of the sort of challenges that are in place. But I also saw reference to terms such as trade-offs, fiscal trade-offs that is, and financial sustainability and fiscal sustainability. So again, the sort of overall constraints in which we're operating, I think we're very, very well set out. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce what are described as our scene setters. So the first scene setter, if that's the term, is to be delivered by the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donohoe. So it's a great pleasure. I'll hand over to you now, Minister Donohoe.
Taoiseach, thank you very much for your opening address. And as always, I want to thank our chair, Alan, for his opening remarks and for once again agreeing to chair our discussions. It has been 2 years since the last National Economic Dialogue because, as you all know, we couldn't go ahead with last year's event due to the effects of the pandemic. This time last year, we were all in this country and elsewhere learning to adapt to the new realities of virtual meetings and conferences. So as we begin this event, we're all now well versed in these digital practices, including for events like today. Nonetheless, I want to thank you all for taking the time to log in and to participate in this year's Economic Dialogue, which sits within the government's wider efforts to strengthen our social dialogue. As Alan has already noted, the structure of the event has changed a bit to reflect our virtual format. There's a greater focus on our breakout groups, the number of which have been expanded to 10. This reflects the all-encompassing nature of the pandemic, which has affected every sector of our society and of our economy. However, the impact of the crisis has not been symmetric. Different sectors, different parts of our society have been affected in different ways. While I believe we can benefit from an upturn, which I believe is in the early phases of being underway, I also want to acknowledge that this is a recovery which has the potential to be diverse in its impact. Some sectors are already regaining pre-pandemic levels of activity, while others will need to change and adopt to and reflect a post-pandemic environment. And our policy, as your government, needs to reflect this reality. So the aim of this year's National Economic Dialogue is to foster discussion on how best to ensure that the recovery does address the many competing economic and social priorities, within the limited resources that are available. So before we begin to separate out into our individual sessions, I do want to give a sense of the overall macroeconomic and budgetary context for our discussions. We're all, of course, aware of the brutal impact that this health crisis had on livelihoods, in jobs, on income in our society. The reintroduction of public health restrictions at the end of last year, of course, led to a further contraction in the first quarter of this year. However, the decline in activity wasn't as severe as that seen during the first lockdown last spring. Modified domestic demand, which is a technical term, but underneath which means those things within our economy that we can see, that we can experience. It's a measure of the best of the different elements of our domestic economy and its economic activity, fell by around 5% on an annual basis in the first quarter of 2021. That 5% figure is in comparison to a fall of 15.5% in quarter two of last year. So this is really clear evidence that in the face of some of the most stringent restrictions, firms and consumers adopted their behaviour. In addition, of course, to our economy becoming more resilient, the vaccination programme is also having a very positive effect. While the number of COVID-19 infections still remains high, case numbers have fallen significantly from the peak in January, and critically, the incidence amongst all age groups has clearly declined. As a result of this progress, the government began easing restrictions in early April, and this relaxation, this moderation, has subsequently gained pace, allowing the economy to start to recover in the second quarter. Various indicators confirm this, including a range of business and consumer confidence indicators, daily card payment data, as well as our tax receipts in May. However, critically, as welcome as that is, and it is, jobs, our labour market, will take more time to recover. In turn, however, this will be facilitated by the more jobs-rich parts of our economy becoming more and more active as we move through the year. Encouragingly, an improvement can already be seen from the pandemic unemployment payment figures, which has fallen from a peak earlier on this year of 481,000 in February to 245,000 as of June the 21st, with further falls expected in the coming weeks. We have seen some evidence of price pressures, both here at home and internationally, and these do need to be carefully monitored. However, at the moment, our main expectation is that many of these pressures will be transitory and part of an economy reopening. In previous iterations of this dialogue, we would have given a presentation on our economic outlook. And given the constraints that we're working in, this hasn't been possible today, but let me say a brief few words on the topic. My department published updated macroeconomic forecasts as part of the Stability Programme update in April, and the projections assumed that the pace of vaccination would accelerate from the second quarter of this year. Under these assumptions, my department was forecasting GDP growth of 4.5% in 2021 and 5% for next year. Modified domestic demand was projected to increase by 7.5% next year as pent-up consumer and business demand is released, along with an unwinding of a portion of the household savings that were built up during the pandemic. The exact pace of growth will, of course, be dependent upon the pace at which personal savings are normalised. The sheer size, however, of accumulated savings and the heightened savings rate is so high that it can and will move the dial on the overall growth rate. Overall, the recovery is expected to gain momentum from the summer onwards as the vaccination programme progresses and as further restrictions are lifted. As I said at the outset, and as the Taoiseach emphasised, the government has put in place unprecedented budgetary measures to combat the virus, to support our economy. Up to €38 billion was made available over a 2-year period. to sustain personal incomes, to invest in our health services, and of course to protect businesses. This is an extraordinary level of support and is equal to almost a fifth of our national income if measured by GNI Star, which is a measurement of our national income which would recognise the large impact of global companies on how our economy performs. In doing so, the government has made full use of all of the budgetary tools that are available to us, including direct public expenditure, the taxation system, and below-the-line support such as credit guarantees. The total value of these payments, including the pandemic unemployment payment, our wage subsidy scheme, and the COVID restriction support scheme, is now over €14.5 billion, of which €5 billion has been spent this year so far. I'm absolutely certain that that was the correct approach. We borrowed heavily. We did so in a counter-cyclical manner to minimise the negative economic effects of the pandemic. And while we still have much to do to defeat this disease, it is, I think, clear that the context against which the forthcoming budget will be framed is one in which economic recovery is gaining significant momentum. And against this backdrop, it is important that our budgetary policy evolves to reflect changing circumstances. But simply, we can't continue to run a really strong expansionary budgetary policy while growth is also quickly accelerating. To do so would imply a shift from the pursuit of counter-cyclical policy during the crisis to a massive pro-cyclical stance during the recovery, which would quickly undermine the sustainability of our public finances. It's worth acknowledging that by the end of this year, Irish public sector debt will stand at close to €250 billion. But let me be really clear. The government knows that we must put in place supports to aid our economy, to support our society as they recover. We have done this and we will continue to do it. But we could do it thanks to the health of our public finances before this terrible disease arrived to our shores. And we will need to regain that health again. In addition, we know that we face many structural budgetary challenges in the future: the change in demographics, the need to achieve a just transition to a carbon neutral economy. And as I've been saying now for many years, the prospective changes to our international tax environment, which then in turn will have implications for our corporate tax receipts. These challenges are all clear, and we know in advance about them, which makes it imperative that we put in place the steps year by year to address them. I want to acknowledge the important role that the Commission on Taxation and Welfare will play with regard to this. It's been convened independently to consider how our taxation and welfare systems can support economic activity and promote increased employment and prosperity, while ensuring that there are sufficient resources available to meet the costs of our public services and supports in the medium to longer term. This Commission will take a longer term, an even more strategic view of the taxation and welfare framework necessary for Ireland as we move past the COVID recovery and as we look to the future. We as a country have now gone through so much in the past 15 months. It has been a difficult and it has been a traumatic experience. We face challenges that we couldn't have foreseen and that we will never forget. Thanks, however, to the success of the vaccine rollout programme, we can see the light at the end of this tunnel. We've worked so hard to get to where we are. And the decisions that we'll make now will ensure that we use this place, this platform, to build an even better future. One that is prosperous, that is sustainable and fair in every sense. But in order to achieve this, and in order to have a debate to get us to that point, we must acknowledge the challenges ahead and we must recognise the trade-offs of today. And I'd encourage all participants to take this into account in their contributions. So I really look forward to a constructive discussion today and tomorrow, and I hope this provides a basis for further progress. Thank you, Alan.
Thanks so much, Minister. Very important to have the broad macro framework presented to us, because I think it's important that, in a sense, that sort of anchors the discussion. I should mention I should have done this earlier on, but we do have a hashtag for the event. I think, again, because everything is remote, I think people are having the sort of conversations we might have had on the fringes of the NED and other conferences. A lot of those are now happening over Twitter. So there is a hashtag. It's hashtag NED21. Hashtag NED21. I'm reminded when we were doing this in 2019, Minister Donoghue pointed out at the time that the Ladies World Cup, I think, was on at the time, and NED19 at the time was also the hashtag for the Dutch women's football team. So there was an element of confusion across the fiscal warriors in Ireland and the soccer supporters in the Netherlands. But anyway, maybe with Netherlands out, that might be less of a concern this year. So now we should be joined, I do believe, by Minister McGrath. So I think I see you there, Minister. I believe you're still in Cork. Always a good decision, I'd have to say. So good to see you anyway. And it's a pleasure to introduce now, and we look forward to your scene-setting remarks. So thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Alan, and good afternoon, everyone. Taoiseach, Minister Donoghue, government colleagues, and all of you who are participating in this year's National Economic Dialogue, which I'm sure we can all agree comes at such a critical juncture as we plan for a recovery that is fair and balanced for our people, while seeking to return the public finances to a position that provides the resilience to respond to the undoubted challenges that also lie ahead. And in this context, budgeting is about much more than setting out spending allocations and raising revenue. The budgetary process must also support the use of these allocations to deliver public services effectively in a way that improves people's lives. In recent years, there have been a number of reforms to support greater and wider engagement in the budgetary process, with the National Economic Dialogue being an important element of these reforms. And this is my first opportunity, and I'm delighted to have it as Minister to participate in the National Economic Dialogue, having attended previously as an opposition spokesperson. And while we are very much still dealing with COVID-19 and are facing renewed uncertainty with the Delta variant, the government is continuing to support our people and businesses suffering from the impact of the pandemic. The vaccine rollout is continuing at pace, and more of our people are benefiting from the protections. So the overall direction of travel remains quite positive. As the economy starts to recover, the priority will be to support our people in getting back to work and using the available public resources to stimulate economic activity while addressing key priorities for our people in housing, healthcare, education, and climate action. And this is reflected, of course, in the overall theme of the dialogue, that of building a sustainable recovery post-COVID, with the breakout sessions focusing on some of the challenges in key priority areas for government. Direct public expenditure measures have formed a critical part of the government's response to COVID. Over the course of 2020 and 2021, approximately €30 billion has been made available by government to fund these expenditure measures. And as Minister Donoghue has said, other measures on the taxation side and in respect of liquidity supports bring the overall intervention by government to a figure of around €38 billion. As part of Budget 2021, an amount of €87.8 billion was provided for this year to fund key public services and to allow the state to provide continued supports to mitigate the impact of COVID on our society and our economy. Taking into account the additional supports provided in the Economic Recovery Plan launched a short number of weeks ago, the gross expenditure provision for the year is now expected to be in the region of €90 billion. This compares to an amount of just over €70 billion in planned expenditure of 2020 pre-COVID. This in particular reflects the significant income and employment supports provided by the Department of Social Protection through the wage subsidy schemes and the pandemic unemployment payment. The planned pre-COVID expenditure in that department for 2020 was just over €20 billion. And this compares with approximately €30 billion for the current year, including the measures set out in the Economic Recovery Plan. So it highlights in very stark terms the scale of the intervention by government on the expenditure side. Last week, the CSO reported a COVID-19 adjusted rate of unemployment for May of just under 22%. Across May, revenue processed EWIS payments in respect of almost 300,000 employees. And these figures illustrate the devastating impact that the pandemic has had on our people and businesses. The scale of the government's response has been both essential and also effective in mitigating these impacts insofar as possible. As we look forward, the key priority as the economy and society continues to reopen is to ensure the careful withdrawal of these supports. This is essential to support an inclusive recovery and to return the public finances to a more sustainable footing. The gradual unwinding of the exceptional COVID spending is fundamental to the task of bringing our national finances to a safe place over the period ahead. Failure to unwind COVID spending once COVID is behind us means this has to be funded by higher taxes or by running larger deficits for longer, with the associated risks this brings for our finances once the ECB's intervention in the markets tapers off and the fiscal rules are fully reinstated. The bottom line is we must manage our finances sensibly as we emerge from COVID to avoid major problems down the line. Before the pandemic, there were significant challenges, and these have not disappeared, and many of them now are resurfacing again. In the Programme for Government agreed last year, our Shared Future, the government has set out these challenges, and we are determined to deliver on those commitments, including implementing Sláintecare, building more homes, greening our economy, and supporting labour market activation and training. While framed in the context of the pandemic, Budget 2021 allocated additional resources to advance certain key priorities. Since 2019, core expenditure has increased by €8.5 billion or 13%. Of this, about 3/4 of the increase has been in the sectors of health, education, social protection, and housing. The pandemic has demonstrated how much we rely on our public health service. In addition to providing for COVID-related spending, core current expenditure in the Department of Health was increased by 10.7% in Budget 2021 in order to build permanent capacity and resilience within our public health system and to implement Sláintecare. As part of Budget 2021, we also committed to a major increase in the capital allocation for housing in order to directly increase the supply of social and affordable homes across our country. Reflecting the critical role that capital investment has to play in delivering on economic and social priorities, core capital investment increased by 19% in the budget last October. When combined with a capital carryover of €700 million, departments and agencies have potential to spend €10.8 billion of exchequer-funded capital in the current year, the highest level in the history of the state. We believe smart capital investment decisions can play a really important part in our recovery, and we are committed, as the Taoiseach has said, to maintaining an ambitious public capital investment programme into the future. The coordinated response at European level has been important in meeting the challenges of the pandemic. The extraordinary fiscal response to the crisis has required that government borrow huge sums of money to fund the necessary measures. Last month, the government agreed the submission to the European Commission of our National Recovery and Resilience Plan. The draft plan, involving projects with a value of almost €1 billion, will enable us to access funding under the EU's Recovery and Resilience Facility, which forms the centrepiece of Next Generation EU. the Union's response to the global pandemic. Ireland's National Recovery and Resilience Plan includes a set of 16 investment projects and 9 reform measures, focusing on advancing the green transition, accelerating and expanding digital reforms and transformation, and social and economic recovery and job creation. European solidarity has also been seen in response to Brexit, and earlier this month, agreement was reached between the Council of the EU and the European Parliament on the Brexit Adjustment Reserve. The agreement will see Ireland receive just over €1 billion of Brexit funding, while we are still understanding the impact of Brexit as its effects continue to unfold. Funding under this adjustment support scheme can be used to support employment, businesses and local communities who are negatively affected by Brexit, including those, of course, in the fishing industry. While support at European level has been important, critical to the ability to respond to COVID was the sound position of the public finances. The strong fiscal position coming into the crisis meant that we were in a position to support incomes and jobs during the crisis. And as we continue to support recovery in the economy, we must also look to return the public finances to a sustainable position over the medium term. In order to deliver on our social and economic priorities, our public resources must be used efficiently to effectively deliver public services and public infrastructure. Getting better outcomes isn't always about spending more. It is sometimes about spending better. Measuring outcomes and ensuring value for money is key. Essential part of this overall public expenditure strategy will be a new national development plan. This will set out the upcoming 10-year period to 2030, revise sectoral capital allocations, including non-exchequer investment, in addition to providing a renewed focus on the delivery of efficient public infrastructure. As with the existing NDP, the revised plan will be aligned with the National Planning Framework to support strong regional infrastructure investment to generate local jobs and improve capability in respect of economic activity throughout all the regions. The plan will include an overarching focus on climate across all sectors, and this will be absolutely necessary to achieve our climate goals. This is the result of the public consultation process that we held. This process showed near consensus on the importance of climate action, balanced regional development, and sustainable housing and transport. In conclusion, Alan, COVID has presented challenges to our society and economy that were unimaginable only 15 months ago. Our people have made sacrifices to implement the public health measures required to slow the progress of the virus. Many lives have been lost, and workers and businesses have faced into enormous challenges. Our public services have worked to support our people, with the staff and our health service in particular responding to the most challenging of circumstances. Given the pace at which the vaccines are being administered, there are many reasons to be hopeful that we as a society can together overcome the challenge posed by the pandemic. However, we must also recognise that the pandemic has impacted some people and sectors much more than others. This is why we must work to ensure that the recovery is balanced and that it is inclusive. The need for such an approach is reflected in the format of the National Economic Dialogue today, with a larger number of breakout sessions than before. And the insights that you, as key stakeholders, provide will be important as government develops its strategy to support recovery in society and in the public finances over the coming years. This will, of necessity, require choices to be made, with certain measures prioritised as permanent expenditure measures must be sustainable over the medium term. It is important that this is considered in a realistic way in all of our deliberations. So I'm primarily here to listen. I really look forward to the breakout session that I'll be chairing this afternoon and to hearing all of the contributions. And I wish everyone well over the remainder of the National Economic Dialogue. Thank you once again, Alan.
Thank you very much, Minister. Another fascinating talk. I think every year at the dialogue, I often sort of make a little request, and one of the requests I'd love to see addressed this year is there's always the temptation that everybody is just going to talk about their particular wish list and they'll use it as an opportunity to lobby for their particular sector. But some of the issues that Minister McGrath just touched on, issues about how we do budgeting, I think it would be great to really have a discussion about how we do things and not just where we're going to place the money. And in that that context, I'm thinking of issues around equality budgeting, green-proofing the budgets, but more broadly, that whole international movement towards bringing well-being indicators into our sort of budgetary analysis so that we have a much more holistic sense of how budgets are actually operating and how they're affecting people. It would be a little bit of a dream of mine if some of the breakout sessions, particularly yours, Minister McGrath, could tackle some of those issues, but I'll leave it to your chairing to see if you can steer the discussion in that way. Okay, so we're now moving to the point that we'll be going to the breakout sessions. So everybody should have been emailed a link. I think you've all registered in advance for your sessions. You should be able to click in, and then you'll be in the hands of the Minister and the rapporteurs who will be chairing and organising all that. Towards the very end of that, I think you'll be hearing a brief few words from me again when I talk you through what we'll be doing tomorrow. But with that, I'm going to invite you all to go and grab a coffee. Settle down then in front of your PCs or whatever for the breakout sessions, and I hope you have a good and productive time. So with that, we'll close this part of the plenary. Thanks.